Are you ready to learn the PBR texture baking workflow used to turn procedural material shader node setups into textures? Welcome to the first episode in the Texture Baking Mastery course. Today we're going to be starting off simple and we're just going to do a full PBR bake for this procedural marble material which I made. It is a paid asset, but I'm releasing it free for you guys so you can follow along with this course, as I want to make sure you guys are working with some of my best stuff while you're learning. So to get started, just click the download link in the description below. Then all you're going to need to do is open your file browser. So I'm going to right click my marble.zip, and then where it says extract all, I'm just going to left click that, and here it's going to say select a destination folder. So you can choose a particular folder if you want to put your marble material into that folder, but I'm just going to keep it in this one and just press extract. And when it's done, we'll have a folder called marble, and if I double click this to open it, there'll be yet another folder called marble, and then you'll have your marble.blend, and that's what's going to actually contain our material. So I'm going to switch back to Blender now. And so some of you probably know how to do this, but we need to now import the Blender material into our Blender file. And we do that with something called the append in Blender. So I'm going to left click file, and then I'm going to choose append. Then I've just navigated to where I've extracted my marble material, which I've just contained within my Blender projects, but for you, if you've just done it from your downloads, it'll just be in your downloads folder. Also, if you want these big icons like I have, you can change your icon type here in the top right hand corner. You can see I can make this more like a list, or I can make it a little bit bigger, or I can choose these big thumbnails like this. There's even more adjustment you can do if you left click this arrow here, and you can see you can change the size and things like that here. With that tangent out of the way, I'm just going to double click the marble folder, and there's another marble folder, and here you can see our marble material. So I'm just going to left click that, and now when we press this append button, it's going to open up another menu, and the one we're looking for is material because we only need to add the material. So I'm going to double click the material folder and then left click marble and choose append. Now, a quick important thing to remember when you're appending a material or some kind of data slot, so that could be like another type of node setup like geometry nodes for example, is we need to now assign it to something before we close our Blender file, because if we close our Blender file now, it's going to delete that material which we just imported, and we'd have to import it all over again. So let's assign it to an object. Since we're just going to be baking onto a cube today, I'm just going to press Shift and then A to open the add menu. Then under mesh, I'm going to choose cube. Then I'm going to come down to my timeline here, or this clock icon, and I'm just going to left click it and change it to the shader editor. This should all be pretty simple to you at this point. And also we're going to make sure that this option here is set to object, as sometimes in Blender 4.2 it seems to set to line style by default. So I'm just going to make sure I'm in the object option here. And here, rather than pressing plus new to add a new material, I'm going to left click this drop down here. And here you can see our marble material has been added, so I'm just going to left click it. We can't see it just now, but an easy way to fix this is I can just press A with my mouse in this menu here, and that's going to select all of my nodes, even if we can't see them. And then I'm going to left click this view option, and then choose frame selected. And there we go, it's now brought all our nodes into view. And you can see that we've added a nice node here, which has got all of our parameters which we can control. But of course, if I change any of these parameters just now, you're not going to be able to see anything because we're not in the material preview mode. So I'm just going to come up to the top here and change to material preview by left clicking this button. If you're in Blender 4.1 or earlier, your material should show just fine, but because we're in Blender 4.2, there is a few issues which we need to fix first. So first of all, I'm going to come up to my render properties panel, and here I'm going to make sure I'm in Eevee. Even though baking occurs in cycles, this is more just an issue in Blender 4.2 that we need to fix, so we need to go into Eevee first. And I'm just going to come down to ray tracing and left click it to enable it, and I'm going to change my max roughness to 1. Now if I zoom in, you can see our marble is working much better now. This node setup I've made has made it so we can easily tweak any of these settings. So for example, if I wanted to change the color of the marble, I could change it here. For example, I could maybe make this a much more white marble. That looks quite good like that, so I'm just going to keep it at this color. You can also adjust the scale. This will scale the entire material, so you can see I can make it bigger or smaller very easily. I'm maybe going to set it to a value of 0.75. Then we have the background pattern scale, and this is just going to scale the pattern underneath. I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that scale. Cracks brightness will control the brightness of these cracks here. Crack scale will just adjust the size of these cracks. Roughness strength relates to the reflections, so if I increase this, you can see it's going to get slightly less clearer reflections. I'll maybe set it to something a little less reflective, like maybe 0.1. Scale roughness is because I'm using some roughness imperfections using a noise texture. All that scale roughness is going to do is change the size of those imperfections. To show you what those imperfections look like, I'm just going to left click this node button here to go into the node tree, and I'm going to move along to where our principal BSDF is, and where it says roughness, I'm just going to follow that noodle, which is just that line, and here you can see I've got the roughness node set up here. you can see it's using a noise texture which has been edited a little bit with a few nodes. And if I just left click and drag this value here and plug it into Marble Shader, which is our output in this case, you can see this is what our roughness imperfections look like. I'll set it back to the default, so I'll just plug this BSDF back in the Marble Shader. So yeah, I thought I'd just give you a quick run through of how this shader works, just to kind of build some familiarity. So of course you're probably more used to, like in the last course, baking just nodes like this rather than a big node setup like we have here. But honestly, there's not too much difference. The only thing this node group is doing is kind of organizing things to make it a little bit easier to use. But the baking process will still be the same. Pretty much what it's going to do is it's going to look at this shader when I'm baking. And let's say, for example, if I wanted to bake the base color, it's going to look at this node setup here, and then it's going to look at the shader that's attached here. And then it's going to see the base color of this, and that's what it's going to bake as the diffuse map or base color map. The same would apply, of course, for the roughness and the emission and things like that for baking height and stuff as well. You will notice this marble shader here doesn't have any bump or normal or anything like that. So today we won't have to bake any height or anything like that. Also, if you're wondering what this UV or object is, this is just an easy switch to control the coordinates this shader uses. It's not really too relevant for this tutorial, but you can see if I switch it to 1, it's now going to use the default cube UV coordinates. And so that might affect the scale. I'm going to switch it back to 0, which is object, which is best for these kind of procedural materials. Awesome. Let's go ahead and start baking. So to start off, we're going to need a nice UV. So I'm going to come up to the top left hand corner where the little cross shape will appear. And then I'm going to left click and drag, and you can see that's pulled out another window. Then I'm going to change my menu here. So I'm going to come up to the top left hand corner, and I'm going to change my editor type here to UV editor. Right now we can't see our UV, which is normal because we need to be in edit mode. So I'm going to bring my mouse back over to where my object is, and I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode. It'll have everything selected by default, which is why we can see our UV, but if you can't see this entire cross shape, then you can just press A in this menu here, and that's going to make sure everything's selected. Notice how if I left click to select away, that we can't see anything in our UV editor. So I'm going to bring my mouse over here again and just press A to select everything. So this cross shape is our default UV, and if you followed along with the beginner's UV unwrapping course, you will know that this cross shape isn't actually the optimal UV unwrap for a cube when you're doing texture baking and texture painting. Rather, for these two processes, in our case texture baking, we're going to want to optimize our texture space a little bit more using something called a smart UV project. This is a pretty small optimization, but it's still something that can be worth doing, especially if you're going to be using a project with a lot of assets. And I always like to use the most optimal way if possible. That's not to say you might want to use Smart UV Project for all types of objects, as some might be better off with a seam-based UV unwrap, which this cross would be an example of. I'm not going to dive too much more into UV unwrapping for now though, because the focus of this tutorial is to get us started with more texture baking. So I'm going to press A to select everything in here, and then I'm going to press U, which will open the UV unwrapping menu. Then I can just choose this Smart UV Project option, and here a bunch of settings will appear. I'm just going to keep it at the default apart from island margin, which I'm going to set to 0.01. Then I'm going to choose unwrap. Here in the bottom left hand corner, you'll see that we can edit all of these settings that we've made, and you can see that it's set our squares like this, and these squares will be slightly bigger, meaning that we get more of our detail preserved in our texture bakes. This is good because that way, no matter what texture resolution we go for example 4K or 2K, we'll be getting the max amount of detail packed into our texture, since we're using the maximum size of squares for our faces of our cube. But with that talk on optimizations out of the way, let's move on to the actual texture baking process. So we've got our UV, which is going to now decide how this texture is going to be baked. Let's go ahead and add an image texture to bake onto. So I'll come to my shader node window here, and I'm just going to make some space by left clicking and dragging my nodes. And I'll press Shift A, and then under texture, I'm going to choose image texture. If you like, you can also come up to the top here and change from edit mode to object mode, but it's totally up to you. Then we're going to be baking the base color first, so I'm going to left click plus new, and you can either call this diffuse or base color. I'm just going to call it diffuse, and then I'll call it marble. And then usually I like to label what type of resolution this is. So you can just put in maybe 2K, since I'm going to make this 2K, which is just pretty much 2000 pixels more or less. But since this is your texture bake, you can label this however you like, but having a nice descriptive name, especially if you're planning on selling your texture bakes, for example, alongside a 3D model. Then for the width and height, I'm going to use a cool trick to quickly double this to make it 2K. So I'm going to left click and then quickly drag down. You can see that's going to highlight both of our numbers. If you're struggling to do this, you can just do this one at a time instead. I'm then going to press the right arrow on my keyboard, and that's going to bring my typer here to the end. And then I can just hold down the Shift key and press the 8 key on the keyboard, and that's going to create an asterisk or a times symbol. And then we can type in the number 2 and press enter. And that's going to perform the math operation of just timesing that by 2, which gives us a 2K texture. Color we can just leave at the default. All of these we can leave at default, and then I can just press new image. I'm going to keep my color space on sRGB since this is going to be a base color map, and now we have this ready to go. Then I'm going to set up our bake settings. So we'll come up to our render properties here, and I'm going to change my render engine from Eevee to cycles, since as you probably know, texture baking always occurs in cycles. Then you'll see we have some sampling here, and there's viewport and render sampling. Render sampling is the only one we need to concern ourselves with for texture baking. So I'm going to change my max samples to something low like 10. You only really need to set this higher if you're baking something which uses lighting. For example, ambient occlusion or a light map. Then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here, and where it says bake, I'm just going to left click to open this tab, and I'm going to change my bake type here from combined to diffuse. Remember, diffuse is pretty much just the same as base color. Then under influence, it's important that we turn off this indirect and direct options. Direct and indirect are just like the lights in your scene and things like that. And all we want is the color that's been inputted into our principled BSDF shader inside of our node group. You might be wondering if we need to bake both of these colors separately, but no, these parameters here, if I go inside my node group here by left clicking this node tree button, are just inputs from here which we can edit using the node tree. But all that's important for the texture baking is what's going into this base color slot on our principal BSDF. I'll press this arrow to come back up. You'll also notice we have a setting here called margin. This will just create some extra baking around our empty space on our UV to make sure there's no detail being lost. Then we need to left click our image texture here, and then we can just go ahead and press bake. Awesome. So our progress bar is completed, and you can see that our texture bake has now been put on top of our UV. And if I zoom out here, you can see it in its full glory. I'm going to want to create a new cube to test our texture bakes as we go. But before I do that, I want to make sure I save my image texture just in case Blender crashes. So I'm going to press Ctrl S first, and that's going to save my blend file. You can also press file and choose save as well. Then where it says image here, you can see there's an asterisk beside it, which just means it needs to be saved. So I'm going to left click that, and then I'm going to choose save. Then I'm going to find a suitable location on my computer where I want to save my texture bakes, and I might create a new folder by just pressing this plus folder button, and I'm going to call this one marble 2K textures. And I'll just press enter. Then I'll double click it to open it, and here I'm just going to save as image here, and now our image should be safe. Just keep in mind, if you bake on top of your diffuse marble 2K again, you will need to come up to image and then choose save, but you won't need to choose a location now. It'll always be in the same location. Of course though, if you wanted to save a duplicate of this texture, you could choose save as and save it in a second location. Alright, let's go ahead and try out our new texture bake. So I'm going to left click my cube, press Shift D to duplicate it, and then I'm going to press G and Y to move my cube along, and just left click. Now because we duplicated this, it means it's going to be using the same UV, which means that our diffused marble will work just fine. So I'm going to remove this material since we're going to create a new one. So I'm just going to press X to unlink data, and you can see that's now created a blank cube for me. Then I'll press plus new to add a new material. I'm just going to name this one by left clicking material.001, and I'm just going to call it marble baked. You can see we've lost our nodes again, so all we can do is just press A to select everything inside of our shader node menu. Then where it says view, I'm just going to go to frame selected. Now let's press Shift A, and then under texture, I'm going to choose image texture. Another thing we'll need is we want to use the UV coordinates. So I'm going to press Shift A, and then under input, I'm going to choose texture coordinate. And since we're using a UV map for our texture bakes, as always, we're just going to use the UV coordinates and plug that into our texture. If I plug this into the color, right now it's just going to be null because we don't actually have anything in it. So I can just choose this drop down here, and here I can choose one of the image textures in my Blender file. If you're doing this in a separate Blender file, you could just press open, find your diffuse marble texture and open it that way. Just make sure you've got an object with the same UV unwrap. Then I'll choose my diffuse marble 2K, and now you can see it's been baked successfully. But we still have to do the reflections and all of that nice stuff. So let's move on to that. I'll left click my other marble cube, and then I'm just going to go to view and then choose frame all. Now I can go ahead and press this X button to unlink it if you like, or you can just add a new texture by pressing Shift A. Then under texture, I'll choose image texture, and I'm going to press plus new. This time you can see we've already got it set up at 2K, which is nice, and I'm just going to call this one roughness marble and then 2K. Then I'm just going to left click new image. Then we'll change our color space here from sRGB to non-color since we're working with a black and white texture here. Then I'm going to come back to my bake settings. If I scroll up to the top, we can keep our render max samples at 10 since we're just baking a basic channel, in our case grayscale, and no lighting information is being used, so a nice low sample count is all we need. So I'll change our bake type then from diffuse to roughness, And with all of our margin and stuff already set up, we should be ready to just go ahead, left click our Roughness Marble 2K, make sure we have our object selected in the 3D viewport, and then we can just go ahead and left click Bake. Awesome, now our bake is complete and you can see in the left hand corner here, we have our roughness imperfections here. Now we'll need to do the same thing again and save our image texture, which is really important after we texture bake. So I'm going to left click this image with a star beside it and choose save. Then I'm going to come to where I've saved my diffuse marble 2K texture, and I'm just going to save my roughness marble 2K in here as well. So I'll just choose save as image, and now everything should be good to go. I'll then left click my cube with all my bakes. It looks like my nodes have disappeared again, so I'm just going to go to view and then choose frame all, and I'm just going to go ahead and left click my diffuse marble, press shift D to duplicate it, and I'm just going to bring it down underneath. I'll left click and drag just to move my marble up, and I'm going to left click this X button here since we're going to use a different texture, and we can either open it and choose it from our file browser, or since it's already in our Blender file, we can just choose our roughness marble 2K from here. You can see it's already set to non-color, but just double check to make sure it's already set to that. Then I'll plug my UV into the vector, and then I'll plug my color into the roughness channel. Now you can see we've got the reflections on this one as well. As always, you can see that this one has a little bit more detail to it, and the only way to fix that would be to baking this at a higher resolution, such as 4K. But to be honest, for this kind of object, this texture size should be fine. When choosing a texture size, it's important to consider how important the object is for your animation project or game project, and also what your budget is in terms of resources. For example, for an animation, you can render out each frame so you can get away with a little bit more detail. Whereas for a game, everything is rendered in real time, so you're going to want to make sure everything is low as possible while still preserving the look you want to achieve. That's as done for baking this marble, but I want to talk a little bit about baking gloss. Now Blender doesn't use gloss as it uses roughness instead, but if you're taking this object and its texture bakes into a different 3D software which uses gloss, it is handy to know how to bake the gloss. That way you won't have to use any nodes inside of that software, which might slightly increase your render times. So I'm going to left click my original marble, and I'm going to have to frame my nodes again. So I'm just going to press view, and then I'm going to choose frame all. And this time we're going to press shift A, then under texture, I'm going to choose image texture, and I'm going to press plus new and choose gloss marble 2K. And we've already got the right width and height for resolution, so I'll just go ahead and press new image. Then this is also grayscale texture, so I'm going to change our color space to non-color. Great. Now how do we do this with this node group? Because it's a little bit hard to invert our roughness using this. Well, we'll have to go inside the node tree. So I'm going to zoom in, and where this node tree button is, I can just left click it to go inside. And the only thing we need to worry about in all of this mess of nodes is this noodle here. If you remember from the beginner course, a gloss map is an inverted roughness map. So all we need to do is invert this channel here, and that will give us our gloss map, which we can then use in 3D softwares which use gloss instead of roughness. So I'm going to press shift A, and in my search bar, I'm just going to search for invert, and here you can see there's an option called invert color. And all we need to do is plug that in between these two nodes by left clicking, and you can see that's put that in place. Instantly you can see our material has become a lot less reflective, because essentially what's happened, all of the whiter areas have become grey or more reflective, and all the darker areas which were once reflective have now become more rough. And since this was a mostly reflective material, the more reflective bits have now become a little bit more rougher or less reflective. Do keep in mind that the higher contrast your roughness was originally, the higher you'll notice this effect. But you can see our invert node has been added in between it, and this is really all you need to do to invert your roughness. Just think of putting it right before the roughness input on your shader, and you should be fine to go no matter what Blender node setup you're using. I'm going to left click this arrow here to come back to the top of my node setup, and I'm going to left click my gloss marble 2K texture, and all we need to do now is come to the bake options, and we can just choose bake. The reason we don't need to change bake type is because we've already inverted our marble shader's roughness and turned it into pretty much a gloss map. So I can just go ahead and bake the roughness channel, and it's going to generate a gloss map for me because of that invert node. So I'll just left click bake with my gloss marble selected. You can see now that our gloss map has been baked, and here it is in the top left hand corner. And you can see what I was saying, how the areas which are darker on the roughness map here, if I just left click this drop down and choose roughness marble, are the lighter areas on our gloss marble. Then we just need to go ahead and save it. So I'm going to left click this image and then choose save as or save. And then in my usual folder, I can just go ahead and press save as image. And that's pretty much it. Of course, we have inverted our shader here, so if you want to go ahead and fix that, you can just left click this node tree button, and we can either delete this invert color node and plug in our value to our roughness, Or if you want a lazy way to do it, you can just go ahead and left click the factor and type in the number 0, which is going to effectively turn off the invert. Awesome. Of course, if you want to use the gloss map in Blender, which in our case wouldn't make sense because we have a roughness map already, but if you did want to do it, all you need to do is get an image texture first, so I'll press Shift A, texture, I'll choose image texture, left click this drop down and choose my gloss marble, plug in my UV to my vector, and before we plug it into roughness, we're going to need to invert it so it becomes roughness again. So I'll press Shift A, then under color, I'll choose invert color, plug the color of this texture into the color here. Then I can plug this color into the roughness slot, and now effectively this gloss marble and this invert color node together are pretty much the same as this roughness marble texture here. But yeah, great job. That's you gone ahead and completed your first lesson in this texture baking mastery course. This one was more of a recap of everything we learned in the last course to help keep all of your knowledge fresh and strong. Feel free to share your texture baking results in the community if you would like to, as I'd love to see how you're getting on with this course. Apart from that though, I'd like to thank you so much for watching this episode, and I'll see you in the next module. Take care.